So welcome to our meeting. This is about the, I think, fourth we've had in person. Great to see you all. Once again, a lot of familiar faces and a lot of new faces. Bill and I handed out some brochures at the UCSD Patient Summit last month, and so hopefully some of you are here today as a result of that. I'd like to extend a special thanks to the Sanford Burnham Prebys Medical Discovery Institute for letting us meet here, especially to Samir Cohen, who helps us out every month getting in here and dealing with any issues that we have. Our principals today of the organization are Bill Lewis, our president, who also does the newsletter summary and is setting up our lunch today. Gene Van Vleet, our director and treasurer. Steve Pendergast, our secretary and newsletter editor. Bill Manning, our director and videographer on the camera today. Myself, Aaron Lamb, and John Tassi, our webmaster. And of course, there's you. Well over 900 members. I'm sure we've got to be past 1,000 by now, so I should update that number. And of course, everyone is a volunteer. You can be too. So for those of you that are new today, hopefully our greeter provided you with the profile form. Please do hand in the cover sheet. One of these, please do hand in the cover sheet before you leave. We'll try to give you a call in the next week to see what other questions you might have and see what information we might be able to provide to you. So that also includes an information kit with information on some articles and booklets and so forth. And yeah, like I said, a welcome call. Now, we haven't done this so completely in a little while, but I'd like to know who is here for their first time today. Go ahead and raise your hand. We have a lot of new people. Thank you for coming today. Yeah. And how many of you have been recently diagnosed? Recently diagnosed and now trying to figure out what to do next. Great, you came to the right meeting because you get to ask a lot of questions today especially. How many people have had prostate cancer for less than 1 year? Go ahead and raise your hands. All right. How many have been 1 to 4 years? All right, a few. 5 to 10? Take a look for new people. Especially look around and see, how many people there are still here after so many years that are part of the group. How about 11 to 15 years? Yeah, still a few, yeah. And how about longer than 15? Gene, how long have you been family? 20 years. How many? 17 and 22. So the point of that is that to remember that prostate cancer is 2 words. It's not a sentence. This is a disease that you certainly have to consider and address, but you have a long life still ahead of you. Take that from the number of people you see around you that have been battling this, even with the treatments of 20 years ago, and we've certainly come a long way since then. How many people are on active surveillance? Yeah. How many people have had surgery? Yeah. Gene here, he's gotten everything. I'll try to go through this quick so his arm doesn't get tired. Radiation? Yeah, radiation. I also had surgery as well. Whether that's proton or X-ray or brachytherapy. Who's had ADT or hormone therapy? Quite a few of us. Chemotherapy. Yeah. A little bit less used, but we certainly do have people with experience in that. Who've received new treatments, such as focal therapy, HIFU, laser, cryo.
All of those.
Yeah. Immunotherapy, Provenge. Anybody has had Provenge? Yeah. Xofigo. And I think, hasn't Bill Lewis also had Xofigo? Or maybe not.
He was trying for it.
Yeah. And Pluvicto. How many have had Pluvicto? That's a new one. If you have questions, obviously Gene is the person to go to on some of these. How many people have had recurrence? Yeah, see, that is the biggest thing that brings people back, basically. And how many people are undecided of their future treatment? Yeah, quite a few. That's why we're here today. How many people have sought out therapy? mental therapy. I admit that I have. My treatment, caught me off guard at the age of 43, and I was single at the time, and just I couldn't even tell my parents for a week about my diagnosis, and it was my therapist who really helped me through the next couple of years of treatment. How many people have sought out antidepressants? That is certainly something to strongly consider, especially on hormone therapy, where your energy level can drop so much. How about has had procedures to address incontinence, such as a artificial sphincter and so forth? What was it that you had?
The opening of the bladder.
Okay.
TURP, I think they
TURP, yes. And how about who has sought out sexual wellness treatment? Perhaps gone to see Dr. Shea or Dr. Goldstein, I think, is the other big one here in San Diego. That's not uncommon as well, and we're hesitant to raise our hands, but, I certainly have, had ED and other issues and got through a lot of it, and I'm also happy to share my story on that if you have any questions. All right, so how many did actually attend the UCSD Patient Summit, and that's how they heard about us? All right, we had, put your hands up again. So we've got 6, I think it was, from that last month. Thanks for joining us. I hope you all found that to be a very interesting presentation. And we also get a number of those doctors here. Dr. McKay and Dr. Rose have spoken to us in the recent past here in person. Who was referred by word of mouth from another patient? Excellent, excellent, great word of mouth. Who was referred by one of your medical professionals? Nobody today? Okay. Well, we're getting our names out there a little bit more. Do ask your medical professionals if they have heard of us and are willing to share the word of our support group. Many doctors do like us because we end up taking a lot of the questions off of their hands and speeding up their their appointments. But we can provide you with some trifold brochures to give to those doctors if they wouldn't mind passing those out to the patients or having them in their waiting rooms. How about from a Google search? I think actually that was how I found the group, or one of my friends found the group. Excellent. Excellent. Who's seen the bumper stickers on the cars? Anyone? Bumper stickers? There's a black SUV out there with one, and there's a pile of them here. Please do take one with you if you'd like, and put it on the bumper. They are not permanently affixed bumpers stickers like the ones from decades ago. You can remove them, so it's no harm to your car. How about had a spouse that discovered us and dragged you in here? In all honesty, I think it was actually a friend of mine, a female friend of mine, who pointed out this group to me originally. How about any other way that you found out about this group? How did you find out about this group?
Years ago, you used to have a ad in the Union Tribune, and I recalled that ad years ago.
Now, our support to you comes especially centered around our website. Hopefully, you've all clicked one of those links before and taken a look there, IPCSG.org. There you can find a ton of information. I assume that I haven't looked recently, but I believe there's a direct link to the YouTube channel that we have at Prostate Cancer Support. And you can find a lot of our old videos there to review if you're not able to attend in person. And those videos also have chapter markers, so you can skip ahead to the doctor and not have to listen to me for the beginning of those videos if you review them. We also have the newsletter. You can access those through the website. We also send them out via email, and by special request, we can also mail you physical copies. That has, as you hopefully have seen, a huge amount of information, especially some of the latest professional journal articles about the latest research on treatment and imaging. and also has a write-up of the prior month's meeting that Bill Lewis and Steve Pendergast put together. Those are just excellent wealths of information. And of course, we have the monthly meetings on the third Saturday of every month, except in December. And we also have hotline numbers that you can call to get help asking questions. Gene, Bill, and Sharon's phone numbers are here. They're also available on the website, and they're happy to take calls, answer questions. Sharon, in particular, wants to help answer questions for women, family, caregivers, whoever, because as stressful as it is for the patient themselves, it can also be extremely difficult on the people around them trying to figure out what is the best thing to help. Now we do have a call for volunteers. We need people to suggest and recruit new speakers. If you know of a medical professional, either directly in the prostate cancer treatment or somebody who treats prostate cancer patients in like an adjacent form, nutritionist and so forth, that type of thing, please do let us know if you think that it would be quite worthwhile to have them come speak to the group. And additionally, we have these roundtable member sharing meetings a couple times a year. And so if you would like to share your treatment experience and answer a lot of questions, help others around you, please get in contact with Gene or Bill. Let them know that you'd like to volunteer for the next meeting like this today. And yes, you can always contact us through the website. There's a link to send us a message or through the hotline number. Now, one thing I'd like to emphasize is that we share patient-focused experience on becoming your own case manager through informing, networking, and caring. We are a group of experienced participants, but we are not medical professionals. So any sharing by anyone in the group may not be a substitute for your medical counsel. And we do need your support. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, therefore donations are all tax deductible. There's no medical or religious affiliations. Our largest costs are with the website, advertising, and mailings. So please do make a donation. If you don't today, you can always make a donation through the website using PayPal or by sending a check to the address you see here. And of course, that address is available on the website. And we, quite often have checks come in any month, or especially in the month of December, as everybody's trying to get their charitable donations in. So yeah, we're passing around some bowls, not the usual baskets because I forgot them. But yeah, please do contribute. We do greatly appreciate it. Our upcoming meeting next month will have Dr. Paul Dato, the Director of Genesis Healthcare. He'll be covering the latest prostate cancer testing and imaging methods used at Genesis Healthcare. And that'll be on March 18th. As for today, we have the member roundtable. We're actually going to start with Darrell Dixon and then have Dan Peddie. And then after that, we're going to have an open mic session for anyone to ask questions in general, whether to Dan and Darrell or to the rest of us. And then we'll also have a treatment breakout group where we'll have a separate group for active surveillance, one for surgery, one for radiation, hormone therapy, advanced treatments, so that you can ask more directed questions from people that that have actively received those treatments. And so from here, I'd like to turn it over to Darrell.
Hey, Darrell.
And I forgot, did you want questions in the middle or just hold them until the end?
I'm okay with questions in the middle.
Okay. Yeah, if any of you have some specific questions during Darrell's presentation, just raise your hand, get my attention, and I'll bring a mic to you. And we're also going to have more Q&A at the end as well. you enough space?
So I use just this
Just
mic?
use this one,
Okay.
yeah.
Let's see how this goes. All right. Well, I'm Darrell Dixon. I just turned 83 a while back, and my adventure started 12 years ago. I was diagnosed with a lymphoma, which ended up in my stomach area, and we treated it with chemo. And but at the same time, we saw an elevated PSA. So at that point, I had prostate cancer, but I chose to take care of the lymphoma first, and time went on. I became a member of coming here and being a watchful surveillance. Well, we found that during that period of time, I waited a little too long. I decided, well, I was going to have my prostate radiated, and so they asked me to do a bone scan, and they showed that a couple spots had metastasized to a couple vertebrae in my back. And we did a biopsy of it, and it was prostate, and it took a lot of the things that were available at that time off the table, because they assumed that the cancer was throughout your body, and taking out the prostate wouldn't solve the problem. Well, that was sort of a game changer. You know, I couldn't do the radiation, so we went on these drugs that keeps your testosterone down, and they really change your life. I was involved with a couple clinical trials to high-end, expensive drugs. They worked, but there were side effects. And I felt like in this clinical trial that I aged about 3 or 4 years in a matter of 3 months. I just lost, well, it just does things to your body, in the knees especially. Well, we got off that clinical trial because while I was on it, a little spot on a lymph node in my in my clavicle area started to grow. And before I was off the clinic, and they kicked me off the clinical trial, it had started out about the size of a finger, end of a finger, and it got as big as a tennis ball. It was prostate related, and it wasn't in a place to really cut it out, so I had it radiated. And behold, it went away. So I'm a sort of an enthusiast for radiation. Well, one thing leads to another, and I think we've got a little bit of a story to tell you here about a miracle that happened in 2017. I had been going through prostate things, and I, because of my previous lymphoma, I had been getting PET scans on a regular basis to make sure it hadn't come back. One day I'm coming home from tennis and backing down the driveway, and I see my wife talking on the phone in the driveway, and she's talking to my oncologist. I'd had a PET scan a few days before, and the oncologist saw something going on that he related to the well, anyway, the story came down that my oncologist said, "Get him to emergency now and don't let him drive." And I think I have a slide up here that would show that. Now, how do I pull that up? Okay, here's what happened. So on January 18th, I went to Tri-City Hospital. They did an MRI of my brain. In that spot off to the left, yes, that's it. That's a tumor that I didn't know I had. A couple days later, I'm down at UCSD right over here, well, right over there actually, and I had it removed on January 20th. Well, it was what I would call a miracle, because if the doctor hadn't seen that, it could have gone on for another 3 or 4 months before I'd had another PET scan, or it would have got to the point where it caused me to, who knows, have an accident or something. That was the first miracle in my life, I think. And then, having it taken out, I can remember sitting up there talking to the doctor, and she's a beautiful lady. You'd think she was an angel, saying, "Doctor, I know you're gonna cut it out. Okay, just be sure you cut out the bad stuff and leave the memories." And anyway, I'm being wheeled down to surgery, and my wife's crying. I said, "Why are you crying? I feel great." Can you go to the next picture? There's after they took out the tumor, 20 titanium staples to hold the head back together. And then the next picture is my surgeon. And this is about Mardi Gras time. And I'm wearing a Mardi Gras thing, and I donated a little 20-pound snail to her with a inscription on the bottom said, "Thanks for leaving the memories." So it was a miracle. Anyway, life goes on after that. I still have prostate issues, and my wife and I I started Keytruda. And Keytruda was a way to fight cancers, and part of the reason for the Keytruda was I had a small tumor inside my adrenal gland that tested positive for prostate. And the Keytruda seemed to have gotten rid of that. Well, I was on it for almost a year, and in between the Keytruda, it's an infusion, and so you go in every month. I have a little window. I took a trip to New Zealand, and while I was in New Zealand, I noticed some blisters on my feet, and I had either that or some bugs had been chewing on me. But I got back, and we found out that I had a thing called bulbous pemphigoid, and it's an incurable, basically, disease that affects very few people. And in the process, when I showed the doctor and she brought in people to look at me, I had these blisters coming up from my leg up to my stomach area. They said, "Well, Keytruda could cause that." So we got off Keytruda. The clinical trial for that was over. And at that point, we're just watching my PSA to see how we can fight it. I made my first appointment with Dr. Lamb, who I'd met through this group, and he's like the second opinion. I go through UCSD, and in that process, I'm getting rid of the blisters, which took almost a year. We used prednisone was the main thing to help keep it down, and then a thing my dermatologist suggested was Cellcept, is a drug that makes your body able to accept organ transplants. So we combination of that, the Cellcept and the prednisone, and in about a year's time, the blisters all gone, but great education. And then getting with Dr. Lamb, we decided, let's try something different. I went to a new drug called, it wasn't Keytruda. Hey, I'm sorry, guys. I'm not as organized as I should be. But it was Nubeca. Nubeca, which is another expensive drug that they actually donated to me because I pleaded I needed help. And it was great, and I was on that for about a year. Whether it did me any good or not, I'm not 100% sure, but it was a real adventure. In the process, my PSA was rising and rising, and somewhere along the way I said, well, we got to get rid of that PSA, and it's got to be my prostate. And so I decided to do Proton. And Dr. Lamb said, oh, I don't think you should do that. You should be better off going back to Keytruda, but we couldn't really do that because of the possible blister problem. And so I went ahead and had the proton therapy done. my PSA had gone up to 40 or so. And I expected the proton therapy, blasting it with protons of your prostate, that it would just clear this all away. Well, it made a very small difference in the PSA. It dropped just a little bit. And was it because of the Nubeca, or was it because of the proton that it dropped? We weren't really sure. Well, somewhere along the way, this new scan came out called PSMA scan. And that was a game changer in my mind, because the first one I got showed spots all over my body, maybe 30 spots that were lighting up, and that indicated prostate had gotten all over, which was a concern previously. And the PSA scan, the first one couldn't relate to a previous PET scan, so we had to wait for the second one. And at that time, we decided, well, let's do chemo again. And chemo was what I had for my lymphoma, but this chemo was basically suggested by Dr. Lamb, and he thought it would put me in a better position to bring my PSA down so that I could try Provecto, which Gene is on. Anyway, this is a scan of the PSA. And I got this off of one of our meetings. This lady was talking about how it works, and it's amazing. The prostate cells pick up this thing from the infusion that you get, and they show all your what's the word? They'll show all the spots, little spots that would never show up on a regular PET scan. And so I realized at that point that these things were what was generating all my PSA rather than the prostate by itself. So it all came clear, and this is a game changer. The new scan was, and if there's any way you can get that when you're being tested, I would highly recommend you press for that. And so that's one of the main things I think I could add to us. Now, what happened with I guess I can use this one. The period of 5 months when I started the chemo, I had an infusion every 2 weeks, which you go in and have chemicals put into your body, and they do it over an hour and a half period, and then you go home and everything's fine. Well, a lot of people are affected by chemo differently, but you almost always lose your hair. And so when I decided I was going to do the chemo, I have this beautiful hair I've been growing for 10 years. I decided I would go to the barber, and I cut it off. So now I get to have my chemo and my hair too, and I just move it from hat to hat. Anyway, let's see what goes on from here. My PSA had gotten up to 84. In 5 months, it got down to, on chemo, it got down to 10.10, and towards the end, which was a month or so ago, it got down to 7.8. Now, since I've been off the chemo, I figured that's a good place to stop. It's starting to rise a little bit. I think right now it's at 15. But it's rising slowly, and it gives me a window to get on this Provecto, which is a lutetium radioactive item that they inject in your body, and it just goes after cancer cells, prostate cancer cells, because it's makeup. But I was going to get that a year ago, and because of the Ukraine and Russian war, the supply wasn't coming through, because it comes out of Russia, I believe. And so we put on hold, and that's why I did the chemo to get so I'm in a perfect position now. I will be able to do that whenever I want, and he's my guinea pig. And we're finding out there's a couple bad things that come off of it, but they're controllable. So I think that's pretty much the end of my story. And any questions?
Any questions for now? Okay.
What was the name of that drug that you injected? You said that went after cancer cells only?
It's Provicto, that's a new one, but the PSMA scan, we'd have to go back and see if
Pluvicto.
Provicto is the treatment, and it's every 6 weeks you get an injection, or it's a transfusion type thing. One thing I might suggest, if you're going to go through anything that requires an infusion, have a port installed. It makes life so much easier. I had it when I had my first chemo, and they took it out, and then when I found out I was going to do Keytruda, which is another infusion, I had it reinstalled. And it's just been there, and whenever I have a blood draw, I get labs every month. They can use that. They don't have to go into my arm. It's just, it makes life a lot easier. But
I got a question. Oh, it was here, there. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah.
I just, not about the medication, but I just want to know, during all your problems, how did you cope with your, your ups and downs? And we were talking about therapy, and how did you?
I play tennis 4 times a week, and I'd use that as sort of a way to tell whether I'm doing good or bad. If I won, I was doing good, and if I, anyway, I think my wife is the main reason that I'm in a happy mood all the time. She's always making sure I'm trying whatever's out there. I was even on Rick Simpson oil for 90 days, where I was taking a gram of this tar that they call Rick Simpson oil, putting it into a little gel and inserting it through the back door to see if I could bring my PSA down. I can't say that it was a game changer, but it wasn't covered by insurance, and it was $20 a day. So I got off of it.
I'm curious about your health insurance coverage. What coverage do you have that?
I basically Medicare is the main one, and then
Medicare Advantage or
United Healthcare is the one where I can choose my own doctors, and they've been great. I've had very few expenses, and I bet I've cost them $1 million.
Go to UCSD.
I do, and Dr. Randall is my oncologist there, and he worked very well with Dr. Lamb. They talked about the type of treatment with my Taxotere, which was a chemo. I basically was getting a half dose rather than 100%, and it had an interesting effect. If we can bring in a picture of that fingernail up, we'd go on vacations to Prescott, and if you see this fingernail, you get an idea. Can you see the ridges? Well, they represent every trip for chemo. It's killing cells. It kills fast-growing cells, and that's why your hair falls out. And so every trip would have a layer of something dying, and I would look at my nails while she was driving to Prescott, and my God, it's a storyline. And it's working. And if it's killing your nails, it's killing the prostate cells in your body, but it's also killing other things that you don't want it to kill. Just part of the... But it never brought me down to where I was feeling sorry for myself. I was a lucky man.
Go ahead. Here first.
Quick question. I'm scheduled for a PET scan in the next. I'm scheduled for a PET scan, but I'm very interested in the PSMA scan.
I have definitely asked for that.
Well, okay, is that something I can just request and
I
I'm
think
with
you can.
scripts and?
It'll tell you so much more than just the old PET scan, because
I'm with scripts. Thank you.
it's only been available a little over a year. And so I've had 3 of them so far, and everything showed that the stuff was going away.
So as far as a treating physician, you have Dr. Lamb, but if somebody's new to prostate cancer and then they just
Well,
are with
my prostate doctor with UCSD is Dr. Randall, and I've been with him for a number of years, but Dr. Lamb was my second.
which type of specialist would somebody go to be the overseer of all your treatment?
Well, right now, I started 12 years ago with Dr. Zytiga, who was my oncologist. And she ran me through all these, and she directs me to a clinical trial if it's available, and all through UCSD. It's just a wonderful system.
One last question, then we'll save the rest of the questions for Darrell to the end.
It's not so much a question, it's trying to help your question. It's one thing to have someone that's overseeing the whole oncology treatment, but it's also important to have a good internist to keep a handle on what's going on with your whole bodily function. I think the oncologists, and there's some great ones in San Diego, a little bit myopic in that they will only focus on the oncology part. But you have to look at your whole body systems, and maybe you have to be your own advocate too, to read up on how your blood tests should look, not only the PSA, but your complete blood panel, your metabolic panel, and that's an important part. I think the oncologists are too busy focusing on just the cancer.
I know we have more questions. We're going to go on to Dan next, and then we'll have plenty more time at the end for questions, either for our 2 speakers.
Thank you very much.
Or everyone in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Darrell. That was good.
Laser pointer is this guy.
Oh, okay.
And then advance with the next one up.
Advance on this one?
The middle one.
The middle one, okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate having the chance to be here. My name's Dan Peddie. Been a member for about 1.5 years, but only on the web, and mostly because of COVID. And as your group disbanded, couldn't meet for a while, that's where I started. So I was watching every meeting and learning a ton, and I really appreciate these personal stories. Yeah, they've been very helpful for me. And so my goal today would be that something out of my experience here is going to give some guidance, some encouragement. Maybe you'll avoid mistakes that I made, and so hopefully it'll be beneficial for you. Here's where I'm going to take this. Let's see. There we go. First, I'm going to talk about my pre-diagnosis condition. What was it that drove me to find out what's going on with my body? Secondly, I want to talk about my diagnosis experience, because I learned quite a bit in that. Third, I'm going to walk you through my therapies that I've had. The first one, which lasted the longest, and then the last 3 that didn't last very long, and then my next treatment, or my next therapy, which will be a clinical trial. So about 2017, I began to have quite a bit of back pain. I was a runner and was doing half marathons at least every year, if not every year or 9 months. And I found myself having a lot of extreme pain. I traveled for my work. I was a consultant, so I was in the air quite a bit. And I found that I couldn't sleep at night laying down. I'd have to sit up at night. And the pain was just really getting bad. Now, I've had scoliosis and stenosis most of my life, so I thought it was all structural and that it was just alignment issues. And I'm not a great runner, so very recreational. I thought, well, I was probably doing damage there. So I went to my doctor. I was at Kaiser at the time, and my doctor said, well, let's take you over to the Spine Institute over at Kaiser, and they can begin some therapy. So we did that. First therapy, they took some upper and lower back x-rays,
Second therapy, some more, exercises to do, always causing me more pain. And we literally, after the second one, we're going to do a vacation in Arizona. Driving over there, I get a phone call from the woman leading the therapy, and she said, we're stopping our activity here. We're sending you back to your primary care physician. I said, how come? She said, I can't say anything about that. So I get to my primary, and she said, well, they saw something on the x-rays, at least the doctor overseeing the therapist. So when you get back, we need to do an MRI and a CT scan. Well, it was that CT scan that showed that I had prostate cancer. And on September 3rd, when I went to visit my doctor to hear the news, very compassionate, very caring. She pulled her chair up to me, put her hands on my knees and said, Dan, I'm sorry, but you have stage 4 metastatic prostate cancer. And amazingly, my reaction was not anger or upset at her. It was very much relief. At least I know what's going on, because that's what bothered me for 2 years, is what in the world's going on with me. And secondly, there was just this sense of, okay, well, now let's get after the plan. How are we going to tackle this thing? And third was just this sense of, I want to finish well. This is incurable. I'm going to die from it. So how do I go from that day to the end and have a meaningful life? So a lot of people, when I tell my story, say, well, how come you weren't getting PSA testing? I mean, I was 65. In fact, it was 8 days after my 65th birthday that I got the diagnosis, so happy birthday to me. And, well, my primary care doctor belonged to the American Association of Family Practice, and they do not believe in doing PSA tests unless the patient asks for it. And I didn't. She was always checking my skin for melanoma. I grew up in Arizona, but never anything about PSAs. And so I just didn't see that. And I wasn't thinking of it. I didn't have any prostate cancer in my family, so nothing was on the radar for that. Ironically, when I went to get my biopsy like 6 days later, the urologist at Kaiser said, when I asked about doing PSAs, she said, oh yeah, as soon as the guy gets to 50, we start doing it every year. I'm going, wait a minute, you're in Kaiser, you're in the same system. How come you're not having a consistent methodology here? So I was a little frustrated there. And I had, in fact, a good friend who had prostate cancer getting treated at MD Anderson in Houston. And he said, man, you should sue the socks off of that doctor. And I wasn't upset so much, but I went to a good friend in Arizona who's one of the top medical malpractice doctors. And I said, Mark, what should I do about this? He said, well, really, this is going to be so hard to prove any sort of malpractice that you just, unless you want to spend the rest of your life in court and have a lot of extra wasted time, I wouldn't do anything about it. So chose not to do anything about it, went ahead and started therapy there. So here was my bone scan about 12 days later. Obviously on the left is before the injection of the material, and the second was after 20 minutes. And you can see above my knees and everywhere above my elbows, I had some impact of cancer here. The biggest thing, when they told me the diagnosis, they said this is an aggressive cancer, and it's because of the spread. My Gleason score was actually only 4+3, which is 7, it's still significant, but not a 10. And so it was because of the spread that they called it aggressive. And the biggest concern they had, was I had a lot of metastasis on my skull. And if you can see, let me get Okay, so there's some spots there that light up. That was all on my skull, and I could feel it. There was pain points. And so they were worried about the cancer going through the brain barrier. And while we didn't radiate my brain, we went immediately into a first line of therapy, which was Lupron and abiraterone. And I did do SBRT, radiation on my back And on my left hip, because there was so much damage on my left hip, they were afraid if I fall, I'll never walk again because they can't repair metastatic damaged bone. And we did my right side too, but my left hip was the main one. I got 5 treatments there, 1 full treatment on my back. I started to look around. What are the alternatives to treatment? I'm doing standard of care. I'm doing what, they're giving me a script for. So I started to look for some alternative treatments. One was CBD, just for my overall, body health. I started to use the balms for my bone pain, and it really helped a lot. I took gummies and tincture, whatever format, that helped me, and started supplementing with turmeric, vitamin E, vitamin C and D, and then I actually did the FemBez, which you probably know about. That's the using the dog dewormer treatment. Anyone know about that? A guy named Tippin. And well, it's a fascinating thing. I did it for 1.5 years. Can't say that I had any benefit from it, but I didn't have any side effects. And so it was an interesting dynamic, and mainly because I feel like I want to go outside the medical community and see what else is out there. So learned a ton, found that some things just weren't worth any sort of risk. But I did supplement to the standard of care. Then I had an interruption, and that was a stroke. 4 months into my treatment, I had a right brainstem stroke, the right vertebral artery blocked up. What I've learned is, in reading a lot of studies, that happens about 43% of the time when people are on abiraterone or Lupron if you have prior cardiac issues. And I had AFib. Not very bad. We didn't have to treat it or anything. But this stroke was, no one has said definitively, but everything lines up well. And even my cardiologist, that hormone therapy is pretty hard on the heart. And so that stroke kind of took me out for a while. My right side was impacted. My speech was okay, but my swallowing I couldn't swallow. So they put a stomach tube in for 15 weeks until I passed this swallow test. During that time, I couldn't take abiraterone because you can't crush it, you can't mix it with anything. You have to swallow it whole as a pill. So I was really worried that my PSA was going to just skyrocket, but it didn't. It actually kind of got better through that time period, which was really interesting for me. As I said, I had to relearn to walk. It took about 6 weeks. I got back to normal. And because I was so excited about recovering, I decided, and I learned that exercise was very important for prostate cancer as well as diet. So I just kept going, and I was getting up to 7 miles a day in terms of walking. I wasn't trying to run anymore, but it became very satisfying, and the pain was not that bad at the time. So basically, let me check my notes here. The last thing down here at the bottom. They put me on oxycodone for pain relief, and I did not want to do that. They gave me a prescription for 4 pills a day, and even at one point said, you need to take 4 pills whether you need it or not, so it builds up in your body. Well, I was so scared of becoming addicted to that. Eventually, I went in to get a spinal test for bone pain, and I asked the doctor, I said, am I going to be on oxy the rest of my life? And he said, actually, you need to get off it, because I've been on it 2 years at that time. I said, well, that's great with me, but what do I do for pain? He said, marijuana. And I said, what? Tell me more. So he said, well, I'm not a marijuana doctor. This is a script pain management guy. But he said, it doesn't have the same addiction factor. It's got some healthy parts to it. So I started literally left that meeting and went to a dispensary. And I've been using CBD and THC for my pain management, and not very much, just mostly at night to sleep better. But that was an interesting dynamic. Again, the direction immediately from my doctor was oxy, and that's when the whole, oxy pandemic's the way I like to think of it, was starting to happen. So Here you can see my PSA. When I was diagnosed, it was over 1,000. Kaiser quits counting after 1,000. And, but within a month and a half, my PSA went down. And it went, you can see from January through April, while I was not able to take abiraterone, it didn't go up, which was, to me, a miracle. So that was, I went all the way to the end of December, and then I decided I got to switch. I wasn't happy with Kaiser, with the way they were handling me. So I switched to Scripps. And so we did abiraterone until this April, so about another year and 2 months. And then my PSA started to rise. So we went to a second line with enzalutamide and started that in May. Didn't stop my PSA. It continued to climb. In fact, by August, it had grown 500%. In between there, because I'd done a PSMA scan in April, and they saw some new spots, I went ahead and had radiation done in July. And it really did help. My pain was relieved quite a bit. We did another one in September just to see the difference. So what you were saying, same thing, because that was a baseline in April. And spread was continuing. I was continuing to have cancer spread around, but I was getting relief. But the PSA kept going up, so we switched to a third therapy, which was olaparib. Lynparza is the brand name. And my PSA went down a little bit for the first month, but then it started taking off again. So it didn't do anything other than give me some significant side effects of fatigue, nausea, my heart, shortness of breath and climbing stairs. It was really hard. So eventually we got to November and PSA was climbing. So we decided, okay, that's not working. What do we do next? Well, chemo would be the next, standard of care. So we were looking at docetaxel, but I really wanted to be in a clinical trial. I believe in those a lot. I think it helps everybody, whether it helps me or not. So we started looking around. And I was at Scripps. I was looking all over the country because in August we did a blood biopsy and found that I have a mutation that's pretty rare. It's called CDK12, and only about 5 or 6% of patients have it. And so there were a bunch of trials on that. None of them I could qualify for. And so a guy from Harvard directed me to Dr. McKay at UCSD. So it took me about 3 months to get in to see her, but we did. And last month, in January, I signed up to do a clinical trial that's going to be with it's going to be chemo, standard of care, plus a new monoclonal antibody for prostate cancer called certuzumab. And it's already being used in lung cancer, ovarian cancer, lymphoma, leukemia. But the trial is going to be to test it for prostate cancer and in combination with docetaxel. So that's my therapies up to today. Here you can see the chart, and I numbered where each of my therapies was. I needed to add on because this week I had a blood test, and now I'm at 88.8. So my PSA is climbing rapidly. Here are the learnings for me on my whole journey. Number one, as we say here, you've got to own your own health. And even I look back at Kaiser when my primary care physician didn't, check me for PSA. That's on me. That's really not on her. I should have found that information. And since then, I've become quite a good researcher on my medical condition. In fact, sometimes I'll visit with a doctor and they'll say, "Are you in the medical profession?" And I say, "No, I'm just trying to learn a lot." But I've just learned I have to be my own manager of my health. Secondly, you got to research. Again, one of the things I've heard from doctors is don't go on the internet, don't look, just we'll tell you what you need to know. I don't believe that. I think you've got to learn as much as you can and at least explore. And you may not come up with any decisions, but you'll know the language then when they talk to you. You'll be able to ask the right questions. Third, you've got to advocate for yourself. You got to make a plan, and you've got to be the air traffic controller of that because you got a lot of things coming in. But you've got to be the one that says, okay, I'm going to take that one, or I'm going to go that direction. And so it really, you've got to be your strongest advocate. Fourth is to really work hard. It took me a lot of work to go through what I've gone through, particularly after my stroke. I had to do swallowing exercises 3 times a day. I had to do, walking exercises. I had to do speech therapy. It was hard work for about 4 months. And since then, every time I've had a different therapy, I've really tried to work hard. I still exercise. I went on a plant-based diet, and that's been actually very easy. But you really got to work hard on your therapies. Ask questions. Don't ever settle for what the doctor says without saying why, or what else, or what about this or that you've learned on research. You've got to ask the questions. One I'm going to put in here after 5 is kind of 5B, and that is your support group. My wife, much like you were saying, has really been the difference for me. And while I have gone ahead and gotten some therapy, and I have been on a antidepressant, my wife has really been my champion and gotten me through where I've gone to today. And lastly, for me, I think one of the reasons why my reaction at the beginning was not negative is my spiritual life has really been important. And, 50 years of having a faith did pay off. And that is that I didn't question why. It was more of okay, where do we go from here? And I want to end well, and I want to impact people. I don't care about living longer. I want to live a higher quality of life. So if I died today, I'd be happy. And what I've learned is that element really undergirds everything you do in your therapy. And in fact, I'd like to end, if we have time, can I play the video?
I went skydiving, I went Rocky Mountain climbing, I went 2.7 seconds on the Blue Mountain, and I looked deeper, and I spoke sweeter, and I gave forgiveness I've been denying. And he said, someday I hope you get the chance to live like you were dying. He said I was finally the husband, but most of the time I wasn't. And I became a friend would like to have.
Oh, sorry. Well, we hold it at that. Sorry about
Yeah,
that. I was
that's
worried I
fine.
was going to reset it.
So
trying to make it
there's
bigger.
a phrase right after where it stopped, where he says, basically, what can I do with this? What will I do with it? What could I do with it? And so for me, that's the question I try and ask every day. What am I going to do about having this condition that I know is going to kill me? At least at this point, there's no extinction event for it. But the main thing is, how am I going to live? And I want to live like I was dying. And so the question I would leave you all is, what are you going to do with it? So thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. And I got to say, wow. You've definitely had quite the experience in the last few years. Dan raises an excellent point. I was on a panel one time talking about my experience, and you could just tell that the level of angst in the audience was just rising and rising. And then I said, hey, wait, folks, remember, don't get so upset about everything. When you realize that, all of us up here as cancer survivors in that panel, we're the lucky ones, right? Because we get to choose how we want to live the rest of our life, as opposed to somebody that died in a car accident or died of a sudden heart attack and stuff like that. So, I just passed my 5th year anniversary of my radiation, we do have years ahead of us. So, don't. As somebody asked, I think previously, what did you do essentially to keep yourself going, right? Playing tennis. For me, it was about I'm still just going to go to work, keep my mind off of this, still engaging in everyday life is one of the most important things to overcoming this. So with that, Dan, why don't you come on back up here? Do we have any questions specifically for Dan?
Dan, first, thanks. And to
Sure.
Mr. Dixon also, those are great and I think very inspiring for all of us. Well, both of your stories. On the slide, I think it was the first or second slide, it says you're taking supplements for vitamin E. Who recommended that? Because
Well, that was part of the protocol with this FemBez strategy. And so you supplement with that and CBD and turmeric while you're taking the FemBez.
I've been told by dietitians and from where I'm going to make sure not to take vitamin E supplements.
Yeah, I've heard that too. So I don't take it every day. I take about 3 a week. And so I've tried to back off when I saw that same thing. So.
And then the last, for the THC that you're taking, is it smoked or gummies?
No, I just use gummies and I do a tincture. For a while, in the middle of the night, I would wake up in severe pain. I mean, literally leap up out in the bed. And I just found out I needed something strong to get back to sleep because I was spending 10 hours in bed but getting about 5 hours of sleep. So tincture has been really good because it's stronger that way. And then for my balm, I have both just a plain CBD balm and then CBD with THC in it at a 1-to-3 ratio. And I use that on spots, real intense pain in my bones. But otherwise, I just use the CBD.
I want to make a comment about the vitamin E question because I dealt with having been told to take vitamin E as part of the treatment for my hypothyroidism. And I also, when I was trying to figure out, why did this happen to me, right? And actually, it was first for me, detected at 39. And I started going through all these things. One of the things I found was a study that had been kind of like the publication of it had kind of been, swept under the rug, but it was a check of the effects of vitamin E and selenium on prostate cancer. They're hoping that it would improve things. And what they found was if you take both vitamin E and selenium, which was what my endocrinologist told me to do, you actually can increase your chances of prostate cancer by 10%. Now, for those of you that were at UCSD last month, Dr. Gio had talked about this, and one of the things that he specifically said, I asked the question about the relation with the hormone system, but what he did say about it was, if you're taking vitamin E, you make sure that it is the natural mixed tocopherol, non-synthetic vitamin E. That is the bad one. Is the synthetic vitamin E is the thing that you just want to stay away from. And I guess the same is true with selenium. I guess that there is a synthetic version of it as well as a natural version of it. So yeah, do be careful with that. The mixed tocopherol is typically red, and the non is clear, and that has become a very difficult thing to find. And the industry knows about it, so they call it mixed tocopherols, but it's not sometimes. So be very careful of that one.
Good point.
More questions?
So you were on Xtandi. Was that your first drug?
After abiraterone.
Okay.
So in May, I started on Xtandi.
Xtandi didn't work for you?
The thing, no.
Because Xtandi took my PSA away. I've been on Xtandi now 5 years.
Oh, well, good for
But
you.
what I'm worried about, then in my doctor said if it stops working, you go to chemotherapy. I'm stupid. I'm trying to figure out what that means, chemotherapy. But you can't explain that all right now. Okay.
Yeah.
But one thing that worries me is that Xtandi, they're giving me Xtandi, but they're keeping my PSA, my testosterone down with continued Lupronide, and I'm worried about being 5 years without testosterone, and my feet are starting to hurt and stuff like that. Some of the stuff you talked about. Anyhow, I just thought I'd throw that in.
Well, I was, one thing to note, I didn't put it on here, it might have been in the notes, but when I got over to Scripps, my oncologist took me off Lupron. I was getting it every 3 months, and he said it's just redundant. And I checked around, and redundant. In other words, abiraterone by itself is sufficient. You don't need Lupron on top of it. So he took me off for a year, but as soon as I went on Xtandi, he put me back on. So, but only as needed. So he was trying to keep my testosterone below 30. And it is. I mean, it did go up once, but it's now down below 2 right now. So.
Next question.
Who was your doctor at Scripps?
My oncologist is Dr. Costi, Michael Costi. And of course, I've got a cardiologist, Dr. Cork, sorry. And then I've got orthopedic spine guy and an orthopedic oncologist as well.
Any more questions specifically for Dan? All right. Why don't we go back to questions specifically for Darrell? I know that we, did you still have a question you wanted to ask Darrell, or, okay. So if there's any more, one more. Yep.
Darrell, thanks again for your presentation. One question I had was, you had a lot of different types of, well, a lot of stories about the cancer and how it spread. Do you think it was all related to your prostate? And also, were you having PSA tests before all that started?
When I first heard about PSA scores, I didn't know what a prostate was, and that was 12 years ago or so. And so coming to the meetings, you learn that stuff. And I would say 90% of what I'm going through has to do with prostate. And it's funny how things along the road, like blisters, changed everything. And every time I wanted to get my strength back. I want to be able to jump like I used to jump. And I talked to the doctors, and they look at me like, "Why do you want to do that?" Well, I want to, but when you're getting your testosterone out of your body, you don't have anything that's building your muscles again. And that's been my biggest disappointment in the whole system. Other than that, it's a beautiful life.
All right. Any more questions for our presenters? Sure.
I guess specifically, if you had started PSA tests, say, in your early 60s, do you think you could have avoided a lot of the issues?
I think let's get some exercise here. So the beauty of it is, once I realized, when I can remember talking to my radiologist that was working on me from my original lymphoma, and I'm in his office, and he says, "Oh, we can handle your prostate issues by doing a chemical castration." And that scared the hell out of me. He used the wrong term. If he would, and so that sort of said, "I'm not doing that. I'm going to go to these meetings." Well, I went to the meetings, learned a lot, but I waited just a little too long before I decided to radiate my prostate.
All right. Any more questions? Okay. Why don't we actually go ahead into the breakout groups? We were thinking about having some just questions to the panel, but we had such great presentations. Why don't we break into groups? One group is going to be active surveillance, up with Bill Manning in the back. And for those of you that are not familiar with active surveillance, that's basically everybody who has decided, I'm not yet ready to go under the knife or start radiation or something like that, and you're going to pursue things such as like constantly test your PSA to watch what's happening, changing your diet, that type of thing. Bill Manning's going to head up that group up there.
We were going to have an open mic session. Did you?
Yeah. Well, I just figured because we were 15 minutes after 11, we could go to the individual groups. But I mean, if anybody has any directed questions that they'd like the whole group to hear, especially, let's take those questions now.
This is not a question. I attended the Prostate Cancer Foundation conference a few weeks ago, and I saw Bill Lewis and Aaron Lamb giving out folders, and I admired them. What was I doing? I was collecting swag. So any of you would like a prostate hand squeege? I have a couple of them here.
Yeah, and just to clarify, that was the UCSD Patient Summit, I believe they called it, and that was the first annual one. So they'll be doing that hopefully every year. The question up here.
I have a generic question. I find, how do we pay for this stuff? I mean, I've been recommended to go on Erlita, $3,500 for the first dose, $800 a month after that. How the hell do we pay for this?
Generally, if you're past 65, you've got Medicare, and then you either have a Medicare Advantage that somebody over here mentioned, or you have Plan F or G. It's now Plan G. Okay, and that covers an awful lot. And then there's an amazing list. Oops, sorry about that. There's an amazing list of foundations that can help you out. I've had money from 4 different foundations to help cover the co-pays. And people at Scripps, they have a wonderful group there that can handle it. I just got some information from the Zero Cancer Organization that they've got people you can call and they will walk you through it. And I've also got a list of probably 50 different organizations that you can potentially contact to help with all those co-pays. And, yeah. So, yeah, make sure I get your name and I'll zap you a copy of it, okay?
Anyone else with a general question?
What I was trying to do is say, let's have an open mic, and anybody who's undecided, who's willing to say in the group that they're undecided, that we could have some fun talking about what you might possibly do next. We've had a real good discussion here about the value of PSMA. That's really important. And the value of being your own manager, and the fact that Gene and I generally are available to handle any calls if you want to talk and talk individually about things. But is anybody saying, I'm not too sure what to do? Greenberg?
Patient Summit, or even the whole, what is the contact information for the UCSD Patient Summit in particular, or any prostate cancer group through UCSD?
I know that they had, because I registered but I couldn't go, that like 4 days later I got the actual presentation material that was there. They sent it out, so you could probably Google it and you can see at least what they did this year. You can see the slides, and then if you're really ambitious, you can contact me, because I quietly recorded most of the sessions, what I thought were the most important sessions. I've got an audio recording to go right along with those slides. So
Will we publish future meetings on the website?
Yes, and I wanted to say that there's a meeting coming up like next week. Well, there's PCRI coming up right away. I think that's March, but like next week there's another one, and I'll make sure we get that emailed out. You should all be on the email list. And oops, I keep touching that thing. I'm having fun. Thank you. Yeah, so there's several of those. The one that I'm thinking of is like back east, but you can attend virtually. And there's some very interesting stuff. I was asked by one of our members that's not local. We have more than half of our members are outside of California, okay? And so I got a call a couple of days ago from a member who's been watching the presentations, and he had a question. He's had radiation and he's got recurrence. And he wonders if there's anybody in the group that had that decision that they faced. Do I get photons? Do I get protons? Do I get brachytherapy? And what are the side effects? And we talked about the fact that, okay, this is still only going to be anecdotal, but I just ran across the agenda for this thing, which I've got with me, and they've got 2 talks on dealing with that same issue at this conference in New York or Washington, D.C. or someplace here in the next week. So if you want these kinds of info, just get back to me.
Question, if I'm with Scripps Does that preclude me from going to UCSD and/or Genesis?
Normally it does
Medicare?
not, and I think maybe last meeting, they said, you just contact the doctor you want to go to, and their people will work it out to talk to your main insurance and make sure you're covered. Ma'am? You said this might be obvious, but what?
Since men can be tested, and they're making it pretty obligatory for men to be tested in the next generation, I've told all the people, including our son, he was tested. So my question is, won't all the people that are here now, won't the numbers go down because more people will now be tested? You guys, including my husband, weren't tested when they should have been. So now won't your numbers go down, hopefully?
We sure hope so. And as an organization, we've been unsure about what to do to get the word out. Just this week, we emailed out a link to our brochure. You saw the trifold brochure that's out on the tables. We sent a link to that and to the last 3 videos to all 90 oncologists and urologists in the San Diego area. Half of them got through. We're going to deal with reaching the other ones. That's our first approach. Our second one is we've got 200 hospitals in the area, hospitals and clinics, that we're going to send a similar email to. And then our next plan after that is to say, okay, we would like to use social media, but how many of you are on social media? Not very many, okay? But your kids and your grandkids are on social media. And so we have a young person, working for us that's going to help us put together a social media campaign that says, get dad, get grandpa tested for PSA and for cancer. So that's how we're going to move forward this year, and it's going to be exciting.
Yeah, I think it was brought up earlier, that like, oh yeah, that was on the doctor that they didn't test me. And it's like, well, now it's on us, right? I mean, doctors now have so much on their minds, they're not necessarily thinking about what might specifically be in our own minds. I also was one of those who, surprisingly, I was tested at 39 for PSA, given that my grandfather had gotten cancer in his 70s. And sadly for me, the doctor that had ordered the test, he died of prostate cancer before he read the results, which kind of says why he was testing somebody 39. But the next doctor, he said, why was that doctor testing somebody who was 39? You don't have with a PSA of 11 at your age, you don't have prostate cancer. Whoops. And so for 3 years, nothing got done, and then my surgery was when my PSA was 19. So now when I talk to guys and I say, oh yeah, I'm a prostate cancer survivor, I then say immediately, what's your PSA? And I still have friends whose doctors refuse to give them a PSA test because they are not 50 years old.
And of course, if they do refuse, $22 or something, you can go through the link that we have for a discounted PSA test at what's it called? Anyway, one of the common local labs.
Yeah, through LabCorp or something like that.
Yeah, the other guys.
Or Quest.
Quest.
Yeah. So yes, definitely ask I say every man above the age of 35, because there's more people coming in now that are closer to 40 that have high PSAs, and they're not going to. They're not going to, get that test otherwise. They're going to be just like, Dan, who his cancer was not detected until a very late stage.
I just want to emphasize that when you try to relay the information to your children to get tested, you have to keep telling them. At least I had to do that with my son. He's now 55. I started when he was about 50, telling him, you better start getting tested because your chances are 50% greater because I have it. Okay? Keep that in mind when you're talking to him because Van Vleets are pretty stubborn people. And he just said, and finally did, and he's doing okay.
He's okay.
Good.
How do you weigh PSA? Well, I mean, we spend a lot of time with PSA versus staging. I read the invasion of prostate, and so I know what my stage is. I know what my Gleason is. I know a lot. My PSA is 17, but I've got a very low stage. How do you weigh all that?
The PSA should be considered a check engine light until you are diagnosed with prostate cancer. So if it's anything above, near zero, it's something to think about. And the classic number is above 4, but a lot of people with prostate cancer have a PSA of 1.5. So anything that's down, that I would say is above 1.5, you ought to get a follow-up. And what's the follow-up? Probably an MRI would be the first thing that you would get. Once you have prostate cancer, then it kind of knocks out all of the other reasons for having a high PSA, which would be inflammation for whatever reason, and infection, which also often causes inflammation. But then the third thing is prostate cancer, and that's the one we want to watch out for. But after you've been treated, then your PSA should go way down, and if it starts to go up, that says, yes, that's prostate cancer growing almost 100%.
Yeah, you especially want to, you can rate how aggressive the cancer is based upon how quickly the PSA rises.
Right.
Too.
The doubling time is very important.
Yeah, yeah. And doubling time of like moderate would be like 18 months, I think, right? 18 months to 2 years is like, that's moderate prostate cancer.
Yeah, but when mine
aggressive.
doubled in a month, okay, it was time to change my approach.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, and note too that the PSA will fluctuate a bit. Mine jumped between, say, 9 and 12 over the course of that first year. They would test it a month later, and suddenly it's 9, and it's up to 12. And a lot of our activity, as well as our level of testosterone in our body, plays a part in what the PSA will be on any day-to-day. So if you've just played an hour-and-a-half soccer match, some aggressive sport, your testosterone might be higher, your PSA might be higher. If you just had sex in the last week, I think they even say your PSA can be higher as well. So it's definitely something that you want to average a little bit. It's you want to keep an eye on it, but yeah, definitely I mean even with telling all of your kids, like, yeah, even if they don't think they have any symptoms or anything like that, get a test as a baseline. Right? Even if it comes back as 0.5, at least now you have a baseline to go from if they don't test again for another 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. We don't look for symptoms with prostate cancer. I've had Gleason 9 metastatic prostate cancer for 7 years and never had a symptom from my cancer, only from the side effects of the treatments.
Yeah, I just want to relay an experience I had recently. I saw a urologist because of my frequent urination demands, and he recommended the TURP procedure, which is, of course, a invasive surgical procedure. I got a second opinion from Dr. Shea that Aaron mentioned earlier. He runs the clinic, the men's health clinic at UCSD. He put me on low-dose Cialis, and I forget the name of it.
That's the name.
Yeah, so presumably, if that works, it's a much better procedure than TURP, of course. So if anybody's considering that kind of.
Are you also using Flomax?
No, it was useless.
Oh, didn't work for you. Works for some people, doesn't work for others.
As a side note, I'm on Cialis, and I primarily take it because it actually helps with incontinence issues. Yeah, and they've said that's kind of like a side use for it. It does help with that. All right, next question. Anyone else?
This is my first meeting, and
welcome.
Maybe this has been discussed before. I just have a question. How many guys here are either contracted or are using the VA for any of the medical procedure? The reason I ask is because some of us from the Vietnam era due to Agent Orange. I was a Navy. My brother was Blue Water Navy. And that prostate cancer is all covered, and it's a disability for the VA. But I had a choice to use the VA or Medicare. I had heard about UCSD, and by happenstance, we met with Dr. Munt, who said, hey, day after tomorrow is the summit. What serendipity, I found out about that from him 2 days before it was going to happen, and I found it extremely interesting and informative. So what I have is a 3-4 Gleason and the biopsy and the PET scan and all that stuff. So I know where I am, and I think what we decided on is a proton therapy through Dr. Brent Rose, who I saw at the summit and was very interesting, very informative. But I just want to find out, so no one here, the reason I ask because there are limited options at the VA. They'll do the surgery and they'll do the radiation, but here I think at UCSD, far more advanced options. And I was just curious to know how many may also have had that same experience.
My impression is we have very few people at the VA, and it sounds like you have switched to UCSD then?
Yes. Well, I do both.
Okay, well, using UCSD I think is a great thing to do.
Testing and the results are right there, and they're pretty responsible. But UCSD, more options and just.
Yeah, and as you might have seen, like it can take 1, 2, 3 months to get in to see someone at UCSD at times. I experienced the same thing like through the script system, or sorry, excuse me, through the Sharp system, where it took 2 months to get an appointment to Genesis, and then another 2 months for the appointment for the biopsy, and it can take a lot of time. But yeah, I hear the same things. Like we don't know much about the VA system, and we'd like to hear more. I mean, if you would love to take a bunch of our brochures and ask perhaps the urologist at the VA to disseminate our info, that would be great.
Sure. They all know each other. I'll just yell. No, I know that doesn't work. The doctors are familiar with each other across the freeway at the VA hospital. They know, and they'll work with them, and they'll share results. The Prolaris testing and there's a little bit more difficult to get that through the VA, but they know, and I can have my choice of either one. And my choice is UCSD.
Yes, I was diagnosed 2 months ago. Have I got to remember all these things. Gleason score of 7.43, and PSA history. I'll just give you this. 721. It was either 4 or 4.71 or 9.71. Can't tell because of the writing of my doctor. But then
either one is of concern. That's a check engine light.
Yeah. Then 6/9/22 was 8.4, and then last 9/21/22 was 6. So now I'm looking at either surgery or radiation, or to wait and look. But I think I tended to go towards surgery, but I'm interested in knowing what is the best breakout groups I should get involved with.
Yeah, Gene has a comment, and then I do too.
Just make sure that you get the most recent imaging before you do anything.
Exactly.
Because my whole life has been created because I didn't. So get good testing so that they can find out where your cancer is located, which in my case, they found out after they took the prostate out, it was already outside. So just make sure.
Well, you did get a PET scan also. I'm clean on that. Just in the prostate.
Okay, are you saying PET scan or are you saying PSMA scan?
Polara PSMA test is the best.
Pylarify. But that's a PSMA scan.
Right.
And if you just got PET, PET by itself, not good enough, okay? You should insist on a PSMA scan before you make your decision, in my opinion.
Yeah, it does seem like there's some resistance from the doctors to go directly to the PSMA for some reason.
But it's being approved, so you should insist.
Push for it. It like demand it. Just be like, I'll do the MRI, but then, or the PET scan, but then but I still want the PSMA before we do any surgery, right? Part of the reason for that is
He's asking what is it?
oh, what is it? So the PSMA scan is a specific, it's a scan specific to prostate cancer where the contrast agent that they inject into you has a protein on it that will actually attach to the exact prostate cancer cells, and it will just light up like a red light in terms of where is the prostate cancer in me. So in my CT scan prior to my surgery, they were just like, oh, yep, the prostate's enlarged and, looks a little funny and yep, you've got regular prostate cancer. What they didn't detect was that there were 2 lymph nodes outside of the prostate that were enlarged. Had I had a PSMA scan, those would have lit right up, and then either one of 2 things. They would have actually removed those as part of the surgery because they did not, and therefore I had to go through 2 years of radiation, hormone therapy, and hell. Well, it actually wasn't hell, but it really wasn't. But yeah, it makes the difference between potentially getting it done right on the first try and not. So, and as it turned out, the radiation protocol then specifically added a higher dose to those lymph nodes for me. It would potentially do the same thing with, in your case as well, if it got out of the prostate.
And I want to mention something before we move on to the next question, and that is, if you're thinking about radiation, you should take a hard look at Dr. Siebert's talk in January, where he talks about boost radiation. Major game changer if you're going to get radiation. And he highly recommends, and I would agree, that you should get a special version of an MRI test. He said at UCSD, but I believe it's also available at Imaging Healthcare Specialists, which has a lot of facilities around town. And they do what's called RSI, Restriction Spectrum Imaging MRI. The situation with MRI is that most doctors, I need to stay by the mark, most doctors use MRI pretty casually, but there's a parameter that's measured in MRI called the DWI, the water diffusion coefficient. And when they scan across and they get those images back, they get the images and then they take their little cursor and they scan around and it says, oh, the DWI is this number here and over here it's this number. You want to insist that the doctor, the radiologist, look for the lowest possible DWI because it tells you, A, where the cancer is, and B, how aggressive it is. The lower the number of the DWI, the more aggressive the cancer is likely to be. And then on top of that, UCSD has developed this, super DWI version that they call RSI, Restriction Spectrum Imaging. The DWI looks at generally what the number is in the cancer cells and right around them. The RSI looks only at the cancer cells, and so it gives them an exact picture of where that tumor is, right, the exact outlines. And in his talk, Dr. Siebert makes a great point that doctors who don't do that, they're half guessing as to where they might possibly give an additional radiation dose. If you get that properly, it cuts your recurrence rate in half. Oh man, that's wonderful. And there's no additional side effects the way it's done. So if you're thinking about radiation, I strongly recommend you go that route. Sir?
The prostate, the disease called prostate cancer is something that just boggles my mind at times, especially as I've been really enjoyed hearing some of these experiences. But it is also one of the slowest developing, it's not like breast cancer that unfortunately has almost immediate effects.
Try pancreatic cancer.
In pancreatic cancer, all those things could happen to you, and whoop, you're now in my case, I had an intermediate risk based on my biopsy and everything, but I didn't feel like that I needed to do immediate treatment, so I stayed with the
active surveillance.
Okay.
Okay, the radiation oncologists all said you're going to be dead if you don't do this. All right, here I am, 3-4 years down the line, and that cancer has not left my prostate. I've had 2 PSMAs left. It has stayed localized. Now, why exactly, I don't know. But I have not had any treatments until recently. I decided to do a preventative step and take my
Orgovix?
Yeah, Orgovix, which you can get free, through scripts in terms of their foundation. And the reason was, for me, more of a preventative step. In other words, I didn't want to see it spread. I've had MRIs, I've had regular PSAs, I've had 2 PSMAs, and all that under active surveillance. And it convinced me that somehow I have to. Now, I may be facing something down the line, I don't know. But my PSA had risen to 90. I said, wow, this is getting to be something. I had a heart treatment, and it went down to 40, almost immediately. So the PSMA is a very tricky measure of anything. Then, when I took the Organovix, in a month, my PSA went down to 6. So these are the types of things that just, like I say, boggle my mind. But the way I look at it, I've turned down all the offers for drugs that people wanted to put me on. I turned down all the radiation treatments. I finally had a medical oncologist who really talked to me, and I, discussed it with her very much, and we ended up with this Organovix, which I agreed to do on an intermittent basis. In other words, I'm going to do it for 3 or 4 months, and if my PSA is down, it should be down to maybe 4 now, as far as I can figure out. I will go off it and then go on surveillance, see if it goes back up. I'll keep an eye on it. But this is what this prostate disease is. It's very tricky. And I would re-emphasize something I heard one of the people say up here. For me, my measure has been how much can I walk? I walk every day. I go 5,000 steps at least, and then when I go to a beach or someplace else, I do 3 or 4 miles, when it's a nice day. And I've tried to do that every day, and that makes the biggest difference in my mind, both psychologically and physically. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it's part of the reason I've been able to keep this thing localized. I don't know.
It's been shown by studies that if you exercise, you'll live twice as long after diagnosis than if you don't. That's a recommendation, sir. And then I think we probably ought to go to our groups.
All right, last question here.
Thank you. My situation, I'm getting ready to go from active surveillance and choosing my treatment. I had a 3+3 Gleason score that went to 3+4.
Okay.
Going between now surgery or radiation. I've done a lot of research. I've talked to a lot of doctors, and I'm leaning towards radiation, SBRT.
Okay, yeah, never do surgery without that PSMA, but you've chosen radiation.
I do believe so. I feel comfortable with my doctors. Is there anything I'm not thinking through? Can anybody talk to me about experience with SBRT, with the shorter treatment with SBRT, any concerns, anything that I should be thinking through a little bit more before I make my decision?
Okay, Gene's got a comment, and then
I'm
I've
58.
got one.
57.
I can tell you that in the process of all the different things that I've been through, that any time that through the imaging, when we could find a spot anywhere, originally they started out in the iliac pelvis area, then to the spine, SBRT treatment was able to every time knock out the spot. But at point X, the last SBRT, which I've done 4 times, the last one did not become effective, and now I'm on the newest type treatment. So it's a matter of SBRT, in my opinion, because A, it's only 5 days and it's very, very powerful. But they have to be able to see, that's why the imaging is so important, exactly where to aim it.
And then, like I just said, if you're going to get radiation, you should use Dr. Siebert's talk as your playbook and get boost radiation to the exact spot after getting RSI MRI at either UCSD or at imaging healthcare specialists. Yes. Restriction spectrum imaging is what the RSI stands for. It's considered a boost, meaning that they give about 50% more radiation to that exact spot rather than merely radiating the whole area and maybe giving a little extra to where they think the tumor is, but the RSI tells you exactly where it is.
Do they do that as part of SBRT or just IMRT?
Any of those can be done, any of those can give you a boost. So SBRT, IMRT, protons, photons, any one of them can give you a boost once they have that image from the RSI MRI.
So if the MRI essentially comes out clean, they don't see a tumor, other imaging?
Well, if the MRI doesn't show anything, then you'd have to say go to PSMA, okay?
But if the imaging didn't show, I mean, even just a basic PET or MRI didn't show anything, you probably wouldn't be here yet, right? I mean, you wouldn't have really gotten a diagnosis even. I mean,
well,
they can do a diagnosis by way of a
Gleason, right?
Okay, so you have a biopsy.
And one of them was 3+4. Do I?
And,
yeah.
And you've
There's
not had
cancer.
any scanning yet?
I just had the one scan.
Okay.
Okay, and did it show a suspicious spot and then they went in? Oh, okay, okay. So you might consider the PSMA test, but I think you should also talk to the people at UCSD about that RSI thing, because they might be able to find it better than otherwise. And you know, somebody should have been looking at out of your current scans, they should have been looking at the DWI, the water diffusion coefficient, and saying, oh, right here, it's lower and it's this much lower right here. But the RSI would be better and the PSMA might be necessary.
So would it be like PSMA first, then RSI, or just ask my doctor?
Yeah, I just discuss them all with them. Okay? So let's move on to our
we'll
groups.
have a group that Bill Manning's going to head up in the back corner for people with questions on active surveillance. Why don't we have surgery in the front of the room over here in the front, first row of chairs.
And who's doing that?
I can do that one.
Okay.
If need be.
Yeah, you've had
Gene, what one do you want to do? Gene can do everything, especially the more advanced treatments.
Advanced treatments. I can do more on the undecided. And what I figured we'd do is we'll get together and start talking, and then we'd migrate out and have some lunch and continue talking. That's the plan.
And you can switch groups too if you have questions for both, obviously. Do we want to have one specifically on radiation?
Yeah. Is Steve Pendergast here?
Yes, he's not.
Okay.
All right. Why don't we add
combine radiation with me?
Yeah. So Bill will do radiation up here in the front here.